Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to create an architectural rendering like this in Photoshop. So basically a quick breakdown of my post-production process, taking it from a flat image to an atmospheric render. So I'm not trying to achieve an ultra realistic nor collage style render, so more like something in between. And if you've seen my work on Instagram or TikTok before, you might already know the kind of visuals I make. If not, feel free to check them out, links are below. And now let's get started. So for this I used the render from Twinmotion as a basis here, but basically you can use any rendering software or even a 3D program. Once I've opened Photoshop, I always start with the outside. That way it can sit in the background while you work on everything else and you can always come back and adjust it later. I build up the vegetation layer by layer. First I find a good photo for the ground, something dry and natural, and I blend the edges between images using grass brushes while the mask is selected. The key thing here is scale. The further something is from the camera, the smaller it needs to be, so stay true to the perspective or it would look off. Then bring in taller grass using the same approach, but take your time with this step and zoom out regularly because it's basically the foundation for everything that comes on top of it. For the trees, it's the same idea. I build them up in layers and usually place 1 or 2 trees close to the camera and a few more sitting further back. The most important thing is blending the transition between the grass and the trunk. If you skip that, the tree just floats. And for the background you can keep it pretty simple, just grab a photo of a tree line because it's going to be blended into a haze anyway and won't read as individual elements. And don't worry too much about color matching your sources at this stage, we'll fix all of that later with adjustments, just focus on placement and blending. And as you can see, even without any color correction yet, it already holds together pretty well. That's all from different sources, but everything's been carefully blended. Now I use curves to adjust the blacks and whites of the background forest. And keep in mind, the further back something sits in the image, the lighter it becomes, because things in the distance lose contrast and start to disappear. I also like to add a fog line or two in front of the last row of trees using a fog brush, because it adds a lot to the sense of depth and also just a different kind of atmosphere altogether. If you're doing a pure exterior shot, you can even bring fog into the foreground, that way it gets almost a little mysterious. Just make sure to bring the opacity down, because you don't want to undo all that careful layering by washing everything out with white fog. Next I give the tree some volume. I paint the shadow side with a darker tone and the lid side with a lighter one. I set the blend mode to multiply and the opacity somewhere between 15 and 30%, and then I do that for every single tree. Last thing for these steps are the shadows. First I paint a soft dark shadow directly at the base of the trunk with a brush. Then I duplicate the tree layer, fill it with black and distort it perspectively to match the direction of the light. If there are already shadow shapes in the render, I'd like to use those as a reference because it helps a lot with the perspective of the shadow. Here I set the blend mode to soft light and the opacity to around 50 to 60%, and that's it for the exterior. For the materials, I'd like to find seamless textures and just place them next to each other to cover the area I need. Then I warp them to fit the perspective of the surface, select the mask and clip the texture to it. And while I'm at it, I already make some adjustments. In this case, I brought the brightness down and then used levels to fine tune the blacks and whites, just to make the material feel a bit darker overall. I do that for every material I add, and honestly adding materials manually in Photoshop is something I'd always recommend if you want that illustrative grainy look instead of something ultra realistic. Now this step is about getting rid of that typical flat, lifeless render look. I just pick any texture that has some structure and a bit of irregularity to it. For the blend mode I'm using hard light or luminosity, and I pull the opacity down. I put the textures over pretty much everything. Here it's the armchair, the sofa, the table, the lamp and the curtains in the back. Next up is adding depth to shadows. I paint black or white shapes over the areas I want to affect, and again with blend mode set to soft light and low opacity. Around the windows it's especially important to add a shadow border to really separate the inside from the outside. The masks are super helpful here. If I paint over something that should stay clean, I just select and delete it. One more thing, I always add shadows underneath the furniture because rendering programs often don't get this quite right, but it makes a huge difference and it's what makes the piece of furniture actually look like it's sitting on the floor instead of just floating above it. Last step is bringing everything together. I layer a few different textures on top of the whole image, find the blend mode that works and dial in the opacity. Because the texture sits over everything, it visually connects all of the elements into one cohesive image. And at the very end I always add a camera raw filter on top. If you want a dedicated video on that, just let me know in the comments. And that's the finished render. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.